Hello everyone, and welcome to my BNB CBS Gossip 24 channel. Finn stood frozen in the doorway of the Forrester living room, the weight of the truth pressing against his chest like a loaded weapon he had waited too long to fire, his eyes flicking from Brooke's pale, trembling face to Ridge's impatient, increasingly irritated stance, the tension in the room so thick it felt as though a single breath could shatter everything they had built, and when Finn finally spoke, his voice was steady but heavy, every syllable deliberate, every word sharpened by weeks of silent torment, revealing that Brooke Logan, the woman Ridge believed to be his unshakable anchor, his eternal destiny, had been hiding a lie so devastating it rewrote the past and poisoned the future all at once, a lie that began months ago on a night soaked in champagne, jealousy, and unresolved longing, when Brooke had sworn she was alone, vulnerable, and misunderstood, yet secretly met with Deacon behind closed doors. Not for closure, not for coincidence, but for something far more dangerous, a calculated choice that contradicted everything she had promised Ridge, a betrayal wrapped in half-truths and strategic silence, and as Finn detailed the timeline, how Brooke had deleted messages, manipulated situations, leaned into Ridge's trust while knowing full well that she was standing on a foundation of deception, Ridge's face shifted from confusion to disbelief to a barely contained fury, his jaw tightening, fists clenching as memories replayed in his mind like cruel mockery. Every moment he had defended Brooke, every argument he had lost with Taylor, every vow he had made about finally choosing stability over chaos now burning him from the inside out, and Brooke, once so confident in her ability to talk her way out of anything, found herself unraveling, her voice cracking as she tried to interrupt, to soften the blow, to insist that Finn was misunderstanding, exaggerating, or crossing a line that didn't belong to him. But Finn didn't stop, because once the truth began pouring out, it demanded to be heard in full, exposing not just the lie itself but the ripple effect it caused, the way Brooke had subtly influenced Ridge's business decisions, nudged him away from certain alliances, framed Taylor as unstable while positioning herself as the only woman who truly knew him, all while carrying the secret that she had already crossed a line she swore she never would again, and Ridge erupted then. His voice thunderous, echoing through the room as years of suppressed anger finally detonated, accusing Brooke not just of lying but of robbing him of his agency, his ability to choose his life with open eyes, reminding her that he had begged for honesty, that he had drawn clear boundaries after decades of emotional warfare, only for her to smile, nod, and break them anyway, and Brooke collapsed into tears, insisting that it didn't mean anything, the oldest, weakest defense in the book, one that only fueled Ridge's rage further, because it meant everything, every late night, every argument, every moment he had questioned his instincts and ignored them because he trusted her, and as the confrontation spiraled, old wounds ripped open, with Ridge throwing Taylor's name into the fire, demanding to know how many times Brooke had painted her as the villain while secretly becoming the very thing she accused others of being, and Finn, standing there not as a rival but as a man who believed in truth above comfort, watched the family implode under the weight of honesty that came too late, the shockwaves spreading beyond the room as Steffi arrived mid-explosion, her eyes widening as she took in Ridge's fury and Brooke's desperation, instantly understanding that whatever had just been revealed would change everything, and Brooke's final attempt to regain control, confessing selectively, reframing her intentions, clinging to the idea that love should excuse betrayal, only sealed her fate, because Ridge no longer saw the woman he loved, only a pattern he had been foolish enough to believe was broken, and when he finally told her that this time, she had gone too far, that this lie wasn't just another chapter in their toxic love story but the end of the book itself, the silence that followed was deafening, a silence filled with regret, consequences, and the unmistakable realization that the foundation of the Logan, Forrester saga had cracked beyond repair, leaving everyone in its wake to wonder whether the damage could ever be undone or whether this revelation, this shocking, brutal truth, was the moment that finally destroyed the illusion of destiny forever. The silence Ridge left behind after his final, cutting words was not the calm of resolution but the eerie stillness that follows devastation, the kind that lingers long after the blast, and Brooke felt it settle into her bones as Steffi stepped forward, her eyes sharp, her posture rigid with years of resentment finally vindicated, demanding to know exactly what her father had just learned. And Finn, torn between loyalty and conscience, repeated the truth with brutal clarity, stripping away Brooke's remaining defenses as he laid out how the lie wasn't a single mistake but a sustained choice, one reinforced every time Brooke woke up next to Ridge and chose comfort over confession, and Steffi's reaction was instant, explosive, unleashing months of restrained fury as she accused Brooke of doing exactly what she had always done, weaponizing vulnerability, manipulating narratives, and crying victim once the truth cornered her, while Brooke, shaking, insisted that she loved Ridge, that love had always been the constant, but Steffi laughed bitterly, reminding her that love without honesty was just control dressed up as romance, and the argument escalated until Ridge returned, having overheard just enough from the hallway to confirm that walking away had been the only thing keeping him from saying something unforgivable. Yet even distance couldn't cool the fire burning through him as he announced that he was done making excuses, done rewriting history to protect a fantasy that had cost him years of peace. And when Brooke reached for him, physically and emotionally, begging him not to throw everything away over one secret, Ridge snapped back that it was never one secret, it was a lifetime of them, stacked so high they finally crushed whatever hope he had left, and the weight of that realization cracked something in Brooke, forcing her to confront the possibility that this time, there would be no redemption arc, no last-minute reconciliation fueled by nostalgia, no dramatic reunion sealed with tears and forgiveness, only consequences, raw and permanent, and as word of the confrontation spread through the Forrester estate like wildfire, Taylor arrived, drawn by instinct and years of shared emotional battlegrounds, and the moment she saw Brooke's shattered composure and Ridge's hardened resolve, she knew the axis had shifted, though even she wasn't prepared for the full scope of Finn's revelation, her reaction measured but devastating as she acknowledged that while she never wished Brooke harm, she had always known this ending was inevitable, that patterns don't disappear just because people pretend they have, and Brooke lashed out then, accusing Taylor of waiting for this moment, of silently rooting for her downfall, but Taylor countered calmly that she hadn't needed to wait, because Brooke had always been her own worst enemy, and Ridge, caught between the wreckage of the past and the uncertainty of the future, realized that for the first time in decades, he was standing at a crossroads without illusion guiding him, and that terrified him more than anything, because choosing Brooke had always been familiar, even when it hurt, whereas walking away meant redefining himself entirely, and as the hours dragged on, the emotional carnage deepened, with Steffi demanding boundaries be enforced not just romantically but professionally, warning Brooke that Forrester Creations would no longer be a stage for her personal drama, that trust once broken didn't magically regenerate just because tears were shed, and Brooke's attempts to salvage her reputation fell flat as every word she spoke now sounded rehearsed, every plea echoing with the ghost of what she hadn't said when honesty mattered most, and alone later, in the quiet aftermath, Ridge confronted the memories he had buried for years, the moments of doubt he silenced, the warnings he ignored, the relationships he sacrificed to preserve a love story that demanded more from him than it ever gave back. And that reckoning hardened into resolve, leading him to make a decision that would shock everyone when he announced, the following morning, that he was filing legal separation papers immediately, not out of spite but necessity, declaring that he needed clarity untainted by manipulation, and Brooke's devastation reached a new level as reality settled in, understanding that this wasn't a temporary rupture but a line drawn with finality, and as she faced the empty house, the absence of Ridge's presence louder than any argument, she was forced to confront a truth she had spent her life avoiding, that love, no matter how passionate or enduring, could not survive without trust, and that this time, she had finally run out of chances, while elsewhere, Steffi and Finn grappled with the consequences of honesty, knowing that doing the right thing had shattered a family but also believing that lies left unexposed would have rotted it from within, and as Taylor quietly supported Ridge through his grief, not as a victor, not as a replacement, but as a steady presence, the stage was set for a new era of fractured alliances, redefined loyalties, and emotional aftershocks that would ripple through every relationship connected to Brooke Logan, proving that some explosions don't just destroy what exists, they permanently alter what can ever exist again. The days following Ridge's decision unfolded like a slow-burning catastrophe, not loud but suffocating, as Brooke moved through her once familiar world like a ghost haunting the ruins of her own making, every room echoing with memories she could no longer rewrite, while Ridge buried himself in work at Forrester Creations, channeling his anger into ruthless efficiency, severing emotional ties with the same precision he used to cut fabric, and it didn't take long before the shockwaves of Finn's revelation rippled through the company, whispers spreading through the halls as employees sensed the tectonic shift at the top, the unspoken understanding that Brooke Logan's influence, once untouchable, was now under scrutiny, and Steffi wasted no time asserting control, stepping into meetings with an authority sharpened by vindication, making it clear that personal history would no longer override accountability, a statement that landed like a veiled indictment of Brooke's past privileges, and when Brooke attempted to reclaim ground by presenting a new vision proposal, hoping to remind everyone of her value, she was met not with applause but with polite, detached professionalism, the kind that signals exclusion more loudly than outright rejection, and that was when the panic truly set in, forcing Brooke to confront the reality that her lie had not only cost her Ridge but was systematically dismantling the identity she had built around being indispensable, while across town, Taylor watched these developments with conflicted emotions, refusing to celebrate yet unable to deny a sense of grim validation, knowing that the chaos unfolding was the inevitable result of years spent ignoring emotional truth in favor of romantic nostalgia, and Ridge, caught between guilt and relief, struggled with the quiet moments the most, when the absence of Brooke's voice made him question whether he had overreacted, only to remember Finn's words, the evidence, the calculated omissions, and feel the resolve harden again, understanding that doubt was just another echo of manipulation he had finally escaped, and when Brooke eventually confronted him one last time, cornering him after a late meeting, her desperation stripped of theatrics, she confessed everything, not just the lie Finn exposed but the ones no one had uncovered, the moments she had bent reality to keep him, the fears that drove her to control rather than trust, hoping that total honesty might still save them, but Ridge listened in silence, his expression unreadable, and when she finished, he didn't explode, didn't argue, didn't comfort her, he simply told her that hearing the truth now only confirmed how much he had been denied it before, and that quiet rejection hurt Brooke more than any rage ever could, because it meant the story they shared no longer held power over him, and as she walked away, finally understanding that love could not survive once respect had died, the realization shattered her remaining illusions, while Steffi and Finn navigated their own storm, Finn wrestling with the guilt of being the catalyst for so much pain even as Steffi reassured him that truth was never the villain, and together they stood united against the backlash Brooke attempted to ignite by framing Finn as an outsider who overstepped, but the narrative no longer bent in her favor, because too many people had seen the cracks now, too many patterns finally aligned, and when Brooke attempted to rally support by invoking history, by reminding everyone of her sacrifices, she found that history had turned into evidence rather than defense, and the final blow came when Ridge announced a permanent restructuring at Forrester Creations, one that effectively removed Brooke from any position of strategic influence, citing the need for ethical clarity and emotional boundaries, a decision that stunned the fashion world and cemented the end of an era, and Brooke, forced to confront a future where she was no longer the emotional center of the Forrester universe, faced the terrifying prospect of redefining herself without the chaos that had always fueled her relevance, while Ridge, standing at the edge of a new beginning, realized that freedom came with its own cost, that walking away from a lifelong pattern meant learning how to exist without drama as oxygen, and as Taylor remained nearby, not pushing, not claiming victory, simply present, the possibility of something healthier began to form. Tentative and unspoken, built not on destiny but on choice, and as the dust slowly settled, one truth remained undeniable: Finn's revelation hadn't just exposed a lie, it had dismantled a dynasty of deception, forcing every character in its orbit to confront who they were without the stories they told themselves, proving that sometimes the most shocking explosions aren't loud at all, but quiet reckonings that leave nothing standing the same again. As weeks passed and the initial shock faded into something far more dangerous, normalization, the true cost of Finn's revelation began to surface in subtler but more devastating ways, because while public explosions burned hot and fast, it was the quiet erosion of trust, identity, and legacy that truly dismantled Brooke's world, and she felt it most acutely in the absence of reaction, the way her phone stopped lighting up with urgent messages, the way people at Forrester Creations spoke to her with careful neutrality instead of emotional familiarity, as if she had been reclassified from family to liability, and this shift gnawed at her relentlessly, forcing her to confront a terrifying truth she had never faced before: Without Ridge as her emotional anchor or antagonist, she didn't know who she was supposed to be, and desperation began masquerading as reinvention as Brooke threw herself into damage control, granting carefully curated interviews, presenting herself as reflective and wounded rather than deceptive, subtly reframing the lie as a failure of communication instead of a deliberate choice. But the public response was colder than she anticipated, because audiences had grown weary of redemption stories that never truly redeemed anything, and inside Forrester Creations, Ridge's leadership continued to evolve in ways that startled even him, as he began making decisions unclouded by emotional compromise, decisions that prioritized stability over nostalgia, and while some board members quietly worried he was overcorrecting, others saw the first signs of a future that didn't revolve around perpetual personal crises, and Steffi, firmly entrenched as his most trusted ally, pushed forward an aggressive expansion strategy that symbolized a clean break from the past, one that left little room for sentimentality. And when Brooke attempted to challenge these changes by invoking her legacy, she was met with documentation, policies, and procedures, cold mechanisms that left no room for emotional leverage, making it brutally clear that her influence had been neutralized by design, not impulse. And this realization triggered something volatile in Brooke, a simmering resentment that transformed grief into resolve, because if she could no longer control the narrative through proximity, she would do it through exposure, and so she began quietly revisiting old alliances, reconnecting with figures who owed her favors or harbored lingering grudges against the Forresters, probing for weaknesses, not out of malice alone but survival, convinced that she was being systematically erased from a story she had helped build, while Ridge, sensing the shift but refusing to be drawn back into reactive chaos, doubled down on boundaries, a move that infuriated Brooke more than any confrontation ever could, because it denied her the emotional feedback she relied on to recalibrate her power. And Taylor, observing this dynamic, recognized the familiar signs of escalation and urged Ridge to remain vigilant, not out of rivalry but concern, understanding that unresolved emotional dependency often mutated into retaliation when left unchecked. And as Finn watched from the periphery, increasingly aware that truth had consequences far beyond confession, he wrestled with the moral weight of his actions, questioning whether exposure without accountability truly healed anything or merely reshuffled pain. Yet Steffi remained resolute, reminding him that integrity was not responsible for the damage dishonesty caused, and that allowing lies to persist for the sake of peace only delayed devastation. And this philosophical divide echoed through the family as Hope found herself caught between loyalty to her mother and an uncomfortable recognition of pattern repetition, struggling to defend Brooke without endorsing the choices that led them here. And when Hope confronted Brooke privately, urging her to let go, to stop fighting a war already lost, Brooke snapped, accusing her own daughter of abandoning her, a moment that crystallized just how far isolation had driven her, and the rupture between mother and daughter became yet another casualty of the original lie, while Ridge, unaware of this confrontation, stood at a different crossroads as his growing emotional closeness with Taylor began to attract attention, not because it was dramatic or scandalous, but because it was quiet, stable, and unforced, a contrast so stark it unsettled those accustomed to chaos-driven intimacy. And when Brooke finally realized that Ridge was not only gone but genuinely moving forward, something in her fractured completely, because the lie she had told months ago, once meant to preserve love, had ultimately stripped her of the very relevance she feared losing. And in a final, desperate act to reclaim agency, Brooke prepared to unleash information she had safeguarded for years, secrets that could destabilize the Forrester legacy itself, not as revenge, she told herself, but as balance, believing that if she was to fall, she would not fall alone, unaware, or perhaps unwilling to accept, that this move would cement her transformation from tragic figure to architect of her own destruction, setting the stage for an even greater reckoning that would test whether truth, once weaponized, could still be called justice, or whether it would consume everything in its path, including the woman who first believed she could control it. In the charged stillness before Brooke made her next move, the weight of everything she had lost pressed down on her with suffocating clarity, because this time there was no misunderstanding to blame, no rival to vilify, only her own reflection staring back with unforgiving honesty. And as she held the evidence she planned to reveal, her hands trembled not with fear but with grief for the woman she used to be before survival became strategy, while across town Ridge stood at his office window, watching the city glow, unaware that another storm was gathering, yet sensing instinctively that peace earned too quickly often came with a hidden cost, and as Finn lay awake questioning whether truth could ever truly set anyone free, Brooke finally whispered a goodbye to the life she could no longer reclaim, knowing that whatever came next would either redeem her completely or erase her forever.